All right, we are into chapter 15, which is on a return to Africa, looking at West Africa, Central Africa, and other regions throughout Africa and the development there. Today is going to talk about North and Central African societies here in section 1. And a lot of these groups were still hunting and gathering around this time period. We'll talk about the forest dwellers first. There's one group that we want to use to exemplify the forest dwellers. They're called the Efe or Efe. They are a forest-dwelling hunter-gatherer tribe. They come from the Ituri forest, which is located in the modern-day Congo. These groups lived in very small bands of people and have non-sedentary homes because they are nomadic. Notice that I say have. There are still some Efe people remaining in this region of Africa and still living in the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. The social structure that they generally followed is that they usually were guided by an older male figure as leader, but the older male figure was not an official ruler. They were there more as a guide than as a leader or monarch. They did not have official written laws, and they resolved conflict by having long, varied discussions. I'd like to show you a quick map here of where the Efe were from. This is Congo River, so this is modern-day Republic of the Congo, right in this region here. Okay. This is in blue. This is where the hunting and gathering groups of Central Africa were located. We learned about the San in the past. They were also a hunter-gatherer society. Okay, next is Roman numeral number 2. We're going to talk about some of the stateless societies that existed in Africa, and we'll talk about what a stateless society is. First of all, what you have to understand is that in Africa, a lot of these groups were based on lineages or a lineage, and these are members of a group that they believe they are descendants of a common ancestor, so very similar to clans, but members feel very strong loyalty to one another. In some African societies, lineage groups took the place of rulers, and these groups were called stateless societies. They did not have a centralized system of power. That means one ruler, one region where power disseminated from, but instead, power was generally balanced or spread out so that no one family or lineage had too much control. An example of this is the Igbo people, which are discussed in your textbook on page 410. Capital letter B talks about family descent in some of these groups. There's two different ways that family descent was passed on. Patrilineal is a society that traces ancestry through the father, so inheritance passes from father to son. This is sort of the most common fashion. Like, for example, in our world, you generally take your father's last name, and the female takes the male's last name in marriage. But that is changing. There's some things changing there. With the way the world is working today. In point number 2, we have matrilineal. Matrilineal is where children would trace ancestry through their mother, and sons would inherit land and wealth from their mother's family. Men would still usually hold the positions of authority, though, even in a matrilineal society. Capital letter C talks about something that was practiced in Africa. It's called the age set system. It's quite an interesting way of doing things. It's kind of similar to things that go on in youth sports today. It's an age set, and it consists of young people within a region that are born during a certain time period. Each age set would pass through stages such as warrior and then eventually elder. Men and women would have different life stages, and societies like the Igbo use age sets to teach discipline, community service, and even leadership skills. So these are things that they would use to teach their young. The reason that I compared it to youth sports is I think a lot of my students are in hockey programs, and they refer to each other as like, oh, are you a 95, or are you a 97, or are you an 07 or an 05? And I think that what that does is that groups them into teams based on their age, and then they would be disseminated based on where they live also. So it's a very similar sort of concept there. Roman numeral 3 talks about a different part of Africa in the north that was ruled by Muslim states. And this region was called the Maghrib. The Maghrib was part of North Africa in the north near the modern day Mediterranean coast of Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. It's basically controlled by Islamic rulers there and Islamic law. I'd like to show you also the map here. So what you see up here is the Maghrib. And in the Maghrib, we're going to learn about two different groups, the Almoravid Empire and the Almohad Empire. So Almoravid came first, and then the Almohad came second. But that's this region up here in northern Africa. Okay, so Islamic law is important in this region. In Islam, following the law is a religious obligation. And what it did is it helped bring order to Muslim states such as Northern Africa. Now, the group called the Berbers were the original inhabitants of North Africa, and they eventually converted to Islam. Two very popular Berber groups that united North Africa under Islamic or Muslim rule were the Almohads and the Almoravids. And let's talk about each of those independently. The Almoravids were a strict religious brotherhood of Islam that were based on the teachings of Muslim scholar Abd Allah ibn Yasin. Now, Yasin also led conquest into other parts of North Africa and also into southern Spain. And in southern Spain, the Islamic people, or the Almoravids, were generally called the Moors. So this is in southern Spain. There's a very stronghold of Islamic populations and cities and groups. Eventually, though, the Almoravids were overthrown by the Almohads. The Almohads were a group of Berber reformers that led a religious movement centered in the Atlas mountain range of Morocco. They followed the teachings of Ibn Tumart, who had criticized the later Almoravids for moving away from the traditional practices of Islam. He encouraged followers to strictly obey the Quran and Islamic law, which is also known as Sharia law, which we learned about back in chapter 10. In 1148, the Almohads actually overthrew the Almoravids and ruled the Maghrib of North Africa and Spain for close to 100 years. Now, in your textbook, it does a really good job of talking about the different societies that we made mention of today. We started off talking about the hunter-gatherers who were nomadic, and they were people who moved from place to place, gathering the wild nuts, berries, fruits, grains, and then hunting animals for meat. We used the Fa, and then I also mentioned the San as some examples. Some of the stateless societies, we learned about what a stateless society was, and then we talked about the Igbo. But there are other examples, such as the Tiv and the Nuer, which had very, very large regions of control that were stateless. And then we talked about the Muslim states of North Africa in the Maghrib, and that would be up here on this region of the map, and even into southern Spain here too, which isn't generally detailed on this map, but we do know that the Muslims controlled most of southern Spain at the time. Thank you.